Yeah, and we were talking about this a little bit offline, but framing Bitcoin as the philosopher's stone is just so
Yes,
damn interesting because
yes,
something that was talked about for many hundreds of years,
right.
this as a number of things, but one was the instantiation of the principles of Christ in matter.
Hmm.
Another was like the unifier of opposites, which we
Right.
talked a little
Yeah.
bit about.
Right.
And then the third way the philosopher's stone was described was as an antidote to tyranny in the world.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting because what we have with Bitcoin is a new form of software that's very has a very tight grip on reality through proof of work mining, right? It's like
Right.
integrated to energy, if you will.
Right.
And this technology is having implications or effects on our own code.
Mhm.
Like the way I think about this is, look, we're all, maybe this is not an exact term, but we're running cognitive code. We're all running some kind of
Yeah.
software
Right.
to be
Exactly.
conscious, right?
Right.
That's what the brain is. It's the organic
Right.
computer, whatever you want to call that. Well, our cognitive code is interfacing or interacting with legal codes and moral codes,
Right.
software
Right.
codes, all these
Right.
different codes we've created for ourselves.
Right. Right.
And the
It,
way
yeah.
I guess maybe the purpose or the intention,
Hmm.
maybe not just purpose and earth, the essence of whatever's written into that code has a mutual influential effect on our mind, and that's what
Right.
seems to
Right.
be happening with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That
And
is
what I found
changing us.
interesting, what I found interesting is that we tend to think that laws exist in the outside, right? That laws that are written in a written form, but a lot of laws actually are internal. Like you said, it's a cognitive, right? So that culture has sets of principles and that regulate our behavior. So for instance, I grew up in Japan. So Japanese culture had certain kind of customs and ways of being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though I moved to the US, I carry these laws,
Mm-hmm.
within myself. And then when I interact with Americans, for instance, I catch myself, wow, I am operating with Japanese code, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though like so, for instance, like we have in Japan, like we have freedom of speech,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, we the culture called create a friction because culturally we are not allowed to speak freely.
Hmm.
So there are certain, we kind of regulate our behavior at the unconscious level. And
Like a
there is no
self-censoring, perhaps.
like self-centering, and there is no external law or anything making us to behave like that. Even though the freedom of speech exists technically, but we don't allow ourselves to claim that right because of the
Hmm.
cultural code, right?
Hmm.
So, so that's why I find interesting that Bitcoin is global, and Bitcoin is creating a new culture, enabling a new set of universal human rights code, so to speak, and the freedom is universal. Freedom should be applied to everyone, right? Freedom of speech should be applied to everyone around the world, regardless of their background, gender, cultural, religious, background. And then Bitcoin does that. And then Bitcoin really, I think, disrupt the cultural code as well. So that's why Bitcoin changes us. Bitcoin changes us to act in a way that we actually can transcend the limitation of our own culture. You
Hmm.
know, so
Right.
I find it very empowering to watch that. Like people in El Salvador, they claim freedom, and that Bitcoin development is really changing their culture as well. You
Yes.
know, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
powerful.
I would go so far to say, if we are running some type of cognitive software, if we just
Right.
describe consciousness as that, you could
Right.
almost say culture is that distributed database of our
Right.
ancestors' experience, right? We've
Yes.
all
Yes.
we've all been running the software for many, many, many generations, and we
Exactly.
codify, I guess, the internal software experience into some external code, which
Right.
becomes the mythologies that rule our life, whether that's a nation state, your church, whatever. It's
Mm.
codified into this structure.
Exactly. Story, mythology, story, and even the story of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
We abide ourselves. I mean, we carry this mythology of democracy that actually we don't live in a democratic state, right? But then at the same time, there's a story of democracy and history and the things, and we
Mm-hmm.
you know, think that we have democracy, and then you know, act within that framework. And what I found interesting is that at the global level, you know, the fiat system or fiat culture is based on the certain kind of fundamental, you know, a certain way of looking at human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and that, you know,
Objectifying.
yeah, but trace back to the behaviorist ideas of, you know, we don't have anything innate, basically. So we are born with like empty, like tabula rasa, right? And
Right.
so that everybody can be molded to whatever the state or the people, you know, society wants them to be, right?
Mm.
So if you have this view that we are born with just a, you know, blank slate of mind, right? We don't have any character, we don't have any personality, we don't have spirit or soul or something that makes us be unique individual. And so if we build society based on this idea, then obviously, you know, everything has to be dependent on the external control, right? And the education becomes such that they want to, you know, fill out, you know, the give us information so that we absorb and then we become somebody instead of
Right.
organically kind of immersing it into our personhood, right?
This necessitates top-down control because they don't
Yes,
believe, they think we're blank slates, right? So that someone has to
exactly.
put the message.
Exactly. And then what's interesting is that the behaviorists such as, you know, John B. Watson, I know you probably know these psychologists, but John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, you know, the famous one is B.F. Skinner. So they basically believe that we don't have free will, basically. And then there isn't anything kind of, you know, I mean, they might acknowledge that there is such thing as a mental life, but they thought that it's not observable, you know, and so there's no point of studying or investigating feeling or motives, you know, the internal life of humankind, because there, you know, we cannot really scientifically approach these data, and so that's why they kind of, for them, thinking is behaving. So they focus on behavior, right? Behavior is observable, behavior is visible. So then based on this kind of empirical scientific method to understand human beings, they missed out the large part of what makes us human: consciousness, feeling, you know, the individuality, and all of that stuff. And then out of that kind of incomplete understanding, they try to build a system, right? And then what I found is that basically central bankers, the people behind central banks, they are behaviorists. They want to control human behavior because they fundamentally do not believe in things like destiny, things like, you know, the individuality, our uniqueness. That's why they are focused on controlling the population, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's a very excellent observation. I guess it would probably be useful for us here to try and define freedom, free will, determinism for people.
right.
I don't, you know, clearly speaking very biased as someone that describes himself as a freedom maximalist, but I don't understand how anyone can look inside themselves and not understand that they are the ultimate decision maker, right? You may face external pressures, but I always point to Viktor Frankl's Final Human Freedom and Man's Search for Meaning, where he describes that we all have this fundamental freedom that no one can take away, and that is the gap between our circumstances and our response to our circumstances.
Right.
So that seems very intuitive and obvious to me, but this is a very hotly debated topic. Like, does free will even exist? Are we just deterministic automatons?
Right.
How do you unpack those
I mean,
concepts?
for me, okay, so I know that quote of, you know, our responsibility, basically, right? So we are like animals, like, you know, we are governed by instinct, right? So then there are certain we have instinctual impulses. When we're hungry, we eat, right? And when when we are threatened by force, then we automatically, like, find a way to respond, like to react, right, to protect ourselves. And these, instinctually driven acts do not involve our consciousness, right? Like, it's like automatic reflex of muscles. Like when you touch something hot, it bypasses our conscious involvement. We say ouch, and we remove our hands, from something hot. And animals are operated, animals are governed by instinct, right? So the nature in some ways protects all the creatures by through instinct, through granting them this wisdom of instinct. And the human beings are also, I think, guided by that, or governed by instinct. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what sets man apart from animals is that we actually have more flexibility, and we have ability to respond. We have ability to respond to instinctual urges that arise within us. So for instance, animals, for instance, if they are hungry, they hunt, they eat whatever they need to eat. They are, the choices of their course of actions are limited, right? Whereas humans, like if I'm hungry, I could just, I could just steal food that is available and then fulfill my hunger. Or I could make a choice to say, I'm going to use my money. I'm going to go to a grocery store and buy something and cook something, right? So that choice, I think, is a very important one, because then humans, with that ability to make choices, that are not dictated by animal instinct, allow us to build a civilization, allow us to build the a different way of being that is more, I say, civil, like peaceful, instead of acting out of this, the reptilian brain, aggression and violence and fear. We can go beyond. We can choose to act in a way that is collaborative, and polite or civil, etc., right? Yes. So that space within us, basically, that allow us to make that choice to withstand in the midst of this instinctual urges. That space, tiny space, is a freedom, in my opinion.
Right.
But I think our culture have to recognize this property of freedom, and cultivate it so that we could actually, each person can have a conscious relationship to their instinctual urges, and then dictate, instead of being dictated, but to guide their actions through their consciousness, and that leads to the development of morality and development of conscience, And I think that our society, of course, based on this behaviorism, that basically denies free will, denies freedom, doesn't even acknowledge this space, So that's, I think, what Bitcoin is doing is Bitcoin points to that. Bitcoin reminds us of the defining feature of what it means to be human,
right? And
how we are different from other mammals. And although we share something similar, something in common, right? But at the same time, we have responsibility that other animals don't have, other species don't have, and that ties to freedom,
Right.